Welcome to the Peregrine Day. This is London. I'm Rachel Parsons and I travel alone. There's always stairs all over the world to show you traveling solo doesn't have to be so scary. But it might make your hair turn white. And that being alone doesn't mean you're lonely.
You never know who you're going to run into.
So come on, don't wait for someone to go with. The world is not going to wait for you.
Thanks for coming.
Don't be afraid. Be a Peregrine Dane. In 1725, English writer Daniel Defoe wrote that London consumes all, circulates all, exports all, and at last pays for all. Defoe was writing about trade, London's driving obsession since time immemorial. But he may as well have been talking about people rather than the product of their labor. An expansive Celtic tribal civilization developed here long before the Romans slid into town, and that was nearly 2,000 years ago. People circulated here, have been consumed by and exported from the place for millennia through successive invasions and immigration from within Britain and without. Most recently, this city paid dearly for the effects of Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic. But in a place that survived catastrophic fires and plague, nothing keeps it down for long. Writers throughout history have enlisted every metaphor imaginable to distill the essence of London. The body, the monster, the machine. Pick your imagery. Today, it's a seething mass of nearly 9 million people, and I fell in love with the monster decades ago. Right about now, in any given episode, is when I tell you why I've come to wherever I am. The truth is, as I film this, I live in London, so lucky me, but it's going to make narrowing down what I want to show you much more difficult because there are a million facets to this city. Just about any culture in the world is here or has come through here and left a mark. Britain's nasty colonial history has virtually guaranteed it. Anything you want, you can find. Women in fancy feathers? Done. Notting Hill Carnival in August every year has you covered. 1,000-year-old fortresses? Done. I need hardly mention the Tower of London. I'm sure you've heard of it. For me, though, the sheer creativity has always been the draw. London is known as a cultural capital throughout the world for its high art scene, which I love. But after living in several neighborhoods, I landed in Shoreditch, arguably part of the city with the most prolific artwork, and one that most travelers never see. In the 80s and 90s, the decaying warehouse district became a hub for counterculture artists looking for cheap space to live and work. One of my favorite things about the east side of London, the East End, is all of the amazing street art, and it's everywhere, and there is a lot of it. So to make heads or tails of it, I need some help. Mercifully, help arrives in the enthusiastic form of Dave Stewart, owner of Shoreditch Street Art Tours. He's been guiding walking tours through the neighborhood since 2008. Dave started studying street art in the early 2000s after a friend introduced him to the work of street artist Banksy.
And a couple of things struck me. First was that you didn't need to know anything at all about art to enjoy street art. I came from a completely non-art background into this, but then again, so do most of the practitioners and participants. The second thing is that it looked like a lot of fun doing it. These guys were clearly having a lot of fun.
And I have a lot of fun taking it all in, but one of the reasons I called Dave is because I'd have more fun if I understood the basics. I can't even tell my graffiti from my street art.
I could give you 100 definitions. My favorite, though, really hinges on who the audience is. So graffiti is for graffiti writers, street art is for everybody. If it's a piece of art where the intention of the artist is to impress the general public, or to intrigue or interest or stimulate the general public, that is, I think, street art. And if they're out to impress other graffiti writers with their letter style, with their complexity. That's a letter S down there. We've got a letter I here, we've got a letter D, a letter O, and there's a letter K here. And it looks almost pure abstract, but it is lettering. That's going to be graffiti.
Street art has thrived in Shoreditch for a number of reasons, not the least of which is internationally acclaimed artist Banksy. He helped put the neighborhood on the artistic map years ago. Banksy's work here enjoys a venerated status and is some of the only protected art in the area.
In the early days, street art made a number of promises. It had these ideas, these idealisms. One of them was that it should be democratic and anybody could do it. You didn't have to go to art school. Another was an anti-advertising agenda. Street artists said, we're fed up with our adverts everywhere on all the streets, so we didn't give these people permission to bombard us with these messages. We'd rather have art, and we're going to paint over adverts. And being anti-advertising was used as a justification for their illegal art. So we're taking out adverts. The culture inevitably became a little bit self-promotional for the artists, and these days we do see a lot of street art which really is intended to promote a message, the artist's new product, the artist's show, the artist's identity.
The inverse irony to artists advertising their work is that today, corporate advertising in the East End often mimics the style of street art. But even so, Shoreditch still draws artists from all over the world.
Isn't that sweet? It's Mexican artist Victoria Villasana, and she's doing this hand-stitched embroidery into paper art, and she would leave the threads hanging quite often, sort of 2, 3, 4 feet long. This very sort of Mexican sort of sensibility about the colours of the threads. And other artists start to give her their paper art, saying, could you pimp our art for us, please? Do some of your embroidery. This is Vox Romana from Portland. These two kissing characters. He takes photographs which he then converts into stencils, and he spray paints onto paper and pastes up. And somebody's already been and added something over the top there. You can do that in the world of street art. Now imagine going into the National Portrait Gallery and finding a picture of a kissing couple and augmenting it with your own bit of art. You can do this out in the streets. I love that sort of energy, that constant change.
What you've no doubt noticed by now is that the work is a multi-layered free-for-all. Walls are typically plastered with years' worth of pieces overlapping, obscuring, and sometimes building off one another.
One of the characteristics of street art is that it is ephemeral. It changes constantly. On my tours, I will pass a spot one day and then 24 hours later my chin will drop to find a new piece of art. And I think this is a good thing. It shows a vibrant, healthy level of participation. People are constantly innovating. We're seeing new styles of art. We're seeing new ideas. We're seeing responses to passing political events. I think it's important that street art remains responsive in that way to what the community is experiencing, to what the community wants, And we don't regard a piece of street art disappearing as a loss. It's not a loss. It had its moment. We enjoyed it. It's time for it to move on. It's not a museum. That's, I think, an important part of street art. If you're going to do a piece of street art, as soon as you finish, take a photograph. It may be gone the next day.
Unless, As fast as art disappears on the streets of the East End, there's another creative phenomenon, not far away, that materializes and vanishes even quicker. But, at least in this case, I can set my watch by it. Like clockwork, the ephemeral, magical creatures of the Colour Walk congregate in Old Spitalfields Market on the third Thursday of the month. Rain or shine. And it's London, so let's face it, it's usually rain. If you don't know what a colour walk is, well...
It's pretty easy. It's a bunch of really welcoming, friendly, flamboyant people who love to dress up in colour, who love colour. Me, I dress this way every day.
Sue Kreitzman's been gracing the Thursday Antiques Market at Old Spitalfields with her dazzling presence for nearly 20 years. If her name rings a bell, it's because you might own one of the dozens of cookbooks she's written, or you might have seen her hosting cooking shows on the BBC before she embraced art full-time.
Originally, I would come to shop in the market, and my very colourful friends would come with me. We'd walk, we'd shop, we'd talk, we'd have coffee, we'd have lunch, all in this market, all on Thursday.
Like introducing a new element to a stable chemistry, what began as a chromatic coffee clutch morphed into a growing community when Sue met a kindred spirit in the flamboyant form of Florent Bidouin. Florent likes to make an entrance.
Hey, Rachel! I just thought, the Colour Walk should be something that is the same, but bigger and advertised, so people find it being a safe space for expression. Look at me, I'm very dressed up, ain't I?
And frankly, in a sea of grey and black, which seems to be the standard uniform in London, we need all the help we can get.
I was just saying, I find whenever I meet other colourful people, they're the right kind of nuts for me, and we'll really get on, so I'm here.
Sue and Florent are the faces of the event, but everyone else becomes a familiar face quickly.
It started with a few friends, and it's grown and grown. Sometimes you get 50 or 60 people, and the same amount of photographers. And I come to recharge the energy batteries, recharge the colour batteries, and to get some good feelings and connections with people.
Connection is a recurring theme for everyone at the Colour Walk, especially after the isolation and pain of the COVID-19 pandemic. But even when there's no global catastrophe to consider, London can have an isolating effect. So finding a place where everyone is genuinely open and inviting is a true gift.
The Colour Walk gives me some of the most positive energy I have experienced in this city since I've been here. It really is a delight.
I just love it. It's just, for me, it's an outlet, to put my creativity into, look different, look like me more, maybe. I usually say that this is a visual depiction of my personality without me having to speak. So I could just shut up. But it's very difficult. And this space has allowed me to just blossom.
Obviously, that's not just a metaphor. As the Colour Walk continues to blossom, across town, a different group is represented by the colour of love. Across the River Thames from Parliament, the National COVID Memorial Wall symbolises a fraction of the lives lost to the COVID-19 pandemic. In the 3.5 years after the UK's first COVID case, nearly 26,000 Londoners have died, more than 225,000 people in the whole of Britain, according to official records. If the memorial looks a little DIY, there's good reason. It was created not by government, but by bereaved families and volunteers to bear witness to immense loss and suffering, while those in power just across the river, especially early on, failed to take the pandemic seriously. While hundreds, sometimes more than 1,000 people a day were dying throughout Britain and the rest were under lockdown, then Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his cronies were throwing parties. And if you can use a drink after all that, so can I.
Beer is a big deal here, and I also like supporting companies that try to tackle social issues on top of doing whatever they're doing. I'm on my way to talk to the head brewer at an ale company that has done a pretty innovative job of dealing with food waste while allowing the rest of us to get drunk.
So I'm off to Toast.
Cheers.
Thanks for doing this.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
So let's start from the beginning. What's the whole story behind Toast?
Yeah. So yeah, this is our delicious beer. So there's about half a slice in that. So it's about a slice of surplus bread in every pint of beer. This is half a pint. We're being very sensible given the time of day.
You heard him right. Toast Ale uses surplus bread that would otherwise go to waste to make beer. Toast was the brainchild of Tristram Stewart, an anti-food waste campaigner well known for his TED Talk on the subject. But forget about him, because today my willing victim is Chief Toaster Rob Wilson. He's graciously agreed to talk shop with me even as the company sets up a new tasting room near Regent's Park.
Let's talk about the scale of the problem of food waste, because I first came across Toast from another organization that feeds the homeless using surplus food, and they get I don't know how many tons of food per week from supermarket chains, from bakeries, from whatever. I mean, how big a deal. There's a lot going to waste here.
Over 1 billion tons of food are going to waste every year all over the world, and a third of all food that's produced on this planet goes to waste. And the food industry has by far the biggest impact on the environment. So it's the biggest cause of deforestation. It's a huge use of transportation and energy. It's a massive use of water. And so a lot of these issues that we think of when we think about environmental damage are caused by the food industry, but we all have to eat and drink, right? And so that's fine, but it's also really inefficient. So when 1/3 of this food system is ultimately failing, it's wasting, we realised that there's a very tangible area that you could tackle if you're trying to deal with this big intangible issue of climate change and environmental damage. It feels more tangible when you start thinking about logistics and numbers and how much is wasted. And so with 1 billion tonnes going to waste and 44% of all bread in the UK market going to waste, we realised, and we love our beer in the UK, so we're big beer drinkers, we realised that if you can tie those two together and we could use surplus bread and repurposing, upcycling that into beer, it becomes almost a beacon, a proof of concept of what maybe the broader food industry could do. So yeah, it's a massive issue. London's no different to any other major city though, all over the world. It's an inefficient food system where we're overproducing, food is wasted in the supply chain, food is wasted by us as consumers, we're as guilty as anyone. We can't just point our fingers at the big corporations. So it's about, voting with your wallet, is making conscious consumer decisions, and then that would also feed up. Obviously, there's a degree of blame to point at retailers, and I think the government could do a lot more to legislate and to ensure that the waste isn't happening. But we want to celebrate how you could solve it in a fun and accessible way with beer, rather than getting too preachy and righteous and holier than thou. And we figure this is a fun way to tackle the issue.
When I first heard of this thing, and I'm sure there are other people out there going, all right, bread, like we just picture a bunch of guys standing around a vat like shucking loaves of bread in.
Yeah.
So how does this happen? Is
So
that what happens?
Not too dissimilar actually. It's certainly how we started, but it's got a little bit more tech since then. When we first started, we were literally throwing in baguettes and whole loaves and all sorts, and realised it wasn't making a big difference.
Essentially, beer making is a 3-step process. The first step is to combine malted barley and hot water to make, as Rob calls it, a very wet porridge. That produces a golden nectar that's boiled with hops in the second step. The third step is to cool the concoction and add yeast.
Yeast works its wonders, transfers all that golden nectar into alcoholic golden nectar that's full of flavour from the hops, and then conditions for a week or two, and then it's beer. What we do, exactly the same process, but in that first tank, we replace about 1/3 of the malted barley with yesterday's bread from bakeries. So we create a kind of a crouton, if you like, It's basically a sort of a small breadcrumb, somewhere between a breadcrumb and a crouton, dried, smaller, acts exactly the same as malted barley. It's effectively wheat, and it's how beer was produced for thousands of years. So the first ever beer that we know of was brewed with surplus bread. It's how beer was brewed for millennia. Local brewers, who would always be women, so men bulldozed their way into the beer industry during the Industrial Revolution when they realised money could be made out of it, and fuck the patriarchy. And that's basically when they kicked women out of brewing, but brewing was always managed by women at a local level, village scale, and those women would make use of any grain that they could get their hands on. So it might be wheat, it might be barley, it might be corn, and certainly surplus bread. So they would partner with a local baker, throw that into the mix, and would brew their delicious beer. And then during the Industrial Revolution, supply chains got all efficient, and they started just focusing on what they knew they could definitely get their hands on, which was a steady supply of malted barley, and men took over. And so what we do is trying to make use of this huge surplus ingredient source, but also return brewing back to its origins. There's this kind of romance in realizing that back in the day, certainly women always know what they're doing. So women knew what they were doing. The brewers back in the day knew what they were doing, and now we lost that common sense, and we're trying to bring that back into the mainstream.
All right, is this an awkward time to point out, though, that Tristram is male and the head toaster, Rob, is male?
Louisa and I co-run the business together.
That's true. There are many other women that we're not talking to right now today, but they are all over the place here.
Yeah.
They're the ones actually working, while Rob and I sit and drink beer at 2 p.m.
Cheers.
And if that's not London, I don't know what is.